The room held its breath when Julian Voss walked in, a force of nature in a tailored black suit, his presence bending the air like gravity. Everyone turned: executives, investors, waitstaff drawn to the man who built an empire from nothing. His name whispered in boardrooms and tabloids alike. But I saw at first the flicker of a smile, fleeting and private, meant only for me. I wasn't supposed to be here. A junior graphic designer from Brooklyn, scraping by on freelance gigs. I'd stumbled into this glittering gala at Voss Industries by sheer luck, or maybe fate. My friend Lena, a caterer, had begged me to fill in as her +1 when her date bailed. "Just wear something sharp, Ezra," she'd said, tossing me her brother's old blazer. "And don't spill champagne on anyone important." Now, standing in a sea of Manhattan's elite, I felt like an imposter, my borrowed shoes pinching as I clutched a glass I didn't dare sip. Julian's eyes found mine across the room, and the world tilted. He was untouchable 38, sculpted by ambition, with a reputation for charming anyone into anything. The media called him a visionary. His competitors called him ruthless. Yet here he was, threading through the crowd, his gaze locked on me, a 24-year-old nobody with a sketchbook full of dreams and a heart that hadn't learned to stay quiet. "Ezra, right?" His voice was low, smooth, like whiskey over ice. Up close, his eyes were a storm of gray, and that smile, God, that smile felt like a secret he'd kept just for this moment. I nodded, my throat dry, wondering how he knew my name. Lena hadn't introduced us. I hadn't even spoken to anyone here. "You don't belong here, do you?" he said, not unkindly, leaning closer. His cologne was cedar and something sharper, like the edge of a deal being struck. I bristled, ready to defend myself, but his hand grazed my elbow, light as a whisper. "Neither do I," he added, and the confession hung between us, fragile and electric. Before I could respond, a woman in a red gown, some VP, probably swept in, demanding Julian's attention. He excused himself, but not before his fingers brushed mine, deliberate, leaving a spark that burned long after he walked away. I stood frozen, my pulse racing, knowing I'd just stepped into something I couldn't control. The gala churned on, a blur of clinking glasses and forced laughter. Lena found me, her eyes wide. What the hell was that? Julian Voss doesn't talk to randoms. I shrugged, feigning calm, but my mind was spinning. I didn't tell her about the smile, or the way his touch felt like a promise. Instead, I let her drag me to the dessert table, where I pretended to care about tiramisu while stealing glances at him. He was surrounded now, commanding the room, but every few minutes, his eyes flicked to me, and that smile returned, soft and fleeting, like a star winking out. By midnight, I was ready to bolt. The blazer felt too tight, the room too loud. I slipped toward the exit, my heart heavy with questions I didn't dare ask. That's when I saw him again, alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling below like a canvas of light. He turned, as if he'd been waiting. "Leaving already?" he asked, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "I don't fit in here," I admitted, my voice steadier than I felt. "This isn't my world." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, a reminder he wasn't born untouchable. "Maybe it's not about fitting in," he said. "Maybe it's about finding someone who makes the room feel like it was built for you." My breath caught. He wasn't flirting, not exactly. It was deeper, like he saw something in me I hadn't dared to see in myself. I wanted to ask what he meant, why he was saying this to me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I held his gaze, and for a moment, the world was just us two strangers on the edge of something impossible. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "Stay?" he said, almost a plea, before turning to take the call. I didn't. I slipped out into the cool Manhattan night, my heart pounding with the weight of what I'd left behind and what I knew I'd have to face again. The next morning, I woke to a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Voss Industries. 10 a.m. J. V." My stomach flipped. I stared at the screen, half convinced it was a prank. But the memory of Julian's gray eyes burned too vividly to dismiss. I didn't tell Lena. I didn't tell anyone. I just pulled on my best shirt, a thrift store find that almost passed for designer, and headed to Midtown. Voss Industries' headquarters was a monolith of glass and steel, intimidating in its sleek perfection. The lobby buzzed with employees in sharp suits, their voices clipped and purposeful. I felt like a trespasser, my sneakers squeaking on the marble floor as I approached the receptionist. "Ezra Carter," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to see Mr. Voss." She raised an eyebrow but nodded, handing me a visitor's badge. An elevator ride later, I was in a corner office so vast it could have swallowed my apartment. Julian stood by a window, his back to me, the city sprawling below like a map he'd conquered. "You came," he said without turning, his voice warm but guarded. "You didn't give me much choice," I replied, trying to sound bolder than I felt. He turned, and there it was again, that smile, soft and disarming, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. It threw me off balance, made me forget the speech I'd rehearsed on the subway about staying professional. He gestured to a chair, but I stayed standing, my hands shoved in my pockets. "Why am I here?" I asked, cutting through the pleasantries. "Last night was weird. You don't know me. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," he said, his tone sharp enough to make me flinch. He softened, stepping closer. "I saw your portfolio online, Ezra. Your design's theory raw, honest. They tell stories. I need someone like you on my team." I blinked, stunned. My portfolio was a patchwork of late-night sketches and freelance gigs, nothing that should have caught the eye of a CEO like Julian Voss. "You're offering me a job?" I asked, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Because of some drawings." "Not just drawings," he said, leaning against his desk, his eyes never leaving mine. "Vision. Passion. You have it, even if you don't see it yet." He paused, then added, "And I don't make offers lightly." I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. Was this about my work? Or was it about that moment at the gala? The spark I couldn't unfeel. I took a breath, steadying myself. "What's the catch?" His laugh was low, almost self-deprecating. "No catch. Just a chance. Creative consultant. 6-month contract. You'd work with me directly." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "If you're brave enough." The challenge hung in the air, daring me to step into his world. I said yes before I could overthink it. Signing the contract, he slid across the desk with a pen that probably cost more than my rent. As I handed it back, our fingers brushed again, and the air crackled. "You won't regret this," he said, and I wondered if he meant the job or something else entirely. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I dove into projects at Voss Industries, designing campaigns for products I barely understood, tech gadgets, luxury apps, things that felt a world away from my Brooklyn roots. But Julian was there, guiding me, his feedback sharp but never cruel. He'd linger after meetings, asking about my sketches, my life, my dreams. And every time I walked into a room, that smile would flash, like a signal meant just for me. But the office wasn't a bubble. Whispers followed colleagues who thought I was a diversity hire, a charity case, or worse, someone who'd caught the boss's eye for the wrong reasons. I overheard them in the break room. What's a kid like him doing here? Julian's never this involved with new hires. Their words stung, but I buried them, focusing on my work, on proving I belonged. Then came the late nights. Julian and I would stay past midnight, poring over designs in his office. The city lights our only company. One night, as rain streaked the windows, he leaned back in his chair, watching me sketch. "You're different, Ezra," he said softly. "You see the world in ways I forgot how to." I looked up, my pencil stilling. His guard was down, his usual polish replaced by something raw. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated, then stood, crossing the room to stand beside me. "I built all this," he said, gesturing to the office, the city beyond. "But it's empty. Until you walked in." His hand hovered near mine, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat. I wanted to close the gap, to ask what he meant, but fear held me back. He was Julian Voss, untouchable, unstoppable. And I was just Ezra, a kid from Brooklyn with a heart too big for his own good. The tension between us grew like a storm gathering strength. Every glance, every accidental touch, felt like a step toward a line we couldn't cross. I told myself to focus on the job, to keep my head down, but Julian made that impossible. He'd call me into his office for no reason, asking my opinion on things that didn't need my input, just to keep me close. And that smile, that smile kept pulling me in, making me forget the world outside his orbit. But the world didn't forget us. The whispers in the office turned sharper, more pointed. One afternoon, I overheard two senior designers in the elevator. "He's got Julian wrapped around his finger. Wonder what he's doing to earn that contract." My face burned, but I stayed silent, staring at the floor until the doors opened. I wanted to scream that I was here because of my work, not whatever they imagined. But doubt crept into Julian's see my talent. Or was I just a distraction? I confronted him that night, storming into his office after hours. He was alone, reviewing contracts, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking less like a CEO and more like a man carrying too much. "Is this a game to you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "The smiles, the late nights, what am I to you?" He stood, his expression unreadable, and crossed the room in 3 strides. "You think this is a game?" His voice was low, intense, like he was holding back a flood. "Ezra, I've spent years building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length. Then you walk in, and it's like I can breathe again." My anger faltered, replaced by an ache I couldn't name. "Then why me?" I asked, softer now. "I'm nobody. You could have anyone." He laughed, a bitter sound. "You think I want just anyone? You're real, Ezra. You don't play the corporate game. You don't bend to fit this world. You make me want to be better." His words hit like a tidal wave, washing away my defenses. I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse at his throat, the vulnerability he hid from everyone else. "What happens if we do this?" I whispered. "What happens to us?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek. The world fell away, and for a moment, it was just us, no titles, no expectations, just 2 people who saw each other. Then his phone rang, shrill and insistent, and he pulled back, cursing under his breath. "I have to take this," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we're not done." I left his office, my heart pounding, knowing we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The next day, I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the memory of his touch. But Julian was relentless. He'd find excuses to pull me into meetings, to brush past me in hallways, each moment charged with unspoken promises. I wanted to believe in them, but fear gnawed at me if this was a mistake. What if I was just a fleeting obsession for a man who could have anything? Then came the gala for Voss Industries' new product launch. I was there as part of the design team, but Julian insisted I stand by his side during his speech. The crowd was a sea of power and wealth, and I felt like a fish out of water, my tie too tight, my palms sweaty. Julian, though, was in his element, his voice commanding as he unveiled a sleek new app that promised to change how people connected. But when he finished, he turned to me, his smile breaking through, and said, "This wouldn't have happened without Ezra Carter's vision." The room clapped, but I barely heard it. His words were a spotlight, exposing me to a world that didn't trust me. Later, as we mingled, a board member pulled Julian aside, his voice low but sharp. "Be careful, Julian. People are talking. He's a liability." I pretended not to hear, but the words cut deep. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond, just steered me away, his hand firm on my back. Outside, in the quiet of a balcony overlooking the city, he finally spoke. "I don't care what they say," he said, his voice fierce. "You're not a liability. You're the only thing that feels real." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of his world was pressing in. What if they're right? I asked, my voice breaking. What if I ruin you? He stepped closer, his hands framing my face. "You're not ruining me," he said. "You're saving me." And then he kissed me, soft and desperate, like he'd been holding back for a lifetime. The city hummed below, but all I felt was him, and all I knew was that we were in too deep to turn back. The kiss changed everything. It was a spark in a room full of gasoline, and the flames were spreading. Julian and I didn't talk about it the next day, but we didn't need to. Every glance was a conversation, every touch a confession. We were careful at work, keeping our distance in meetings, but the air between us hummed with secrets. I'd catch his smile across a conference table, and my heart would stutter, knowing it was mine alone. But secrets don't stay buried in a place like Voss Industries. The rumors grew louder, fueled by jealousy and speculation. Colleagues who'd once ignored me now shot me sidelong glances, their whispers following me like shadows. "He's sleeping his way to the top," I heard one say in the copy room. I wanted to confront them, to scream that my work spoke for itself, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because part of me wondered if they were right. Julian sensed it. One evening, as we worked late on a campaign, he shut his laptop and turned to me. "You're pulling away," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Why?" I hesitated, the weight of the rumors pressing down. "People are talking, Julian. They think I'm here because of us, not my work." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something fiercer protectiveness. "Let them talk," he said, standing to pace the room. "They don't know you. They don't know what I see in you." "And what do you see?" I asked, my voice raw. "Because I'm starting to wonder if I'm just a phase for you." He stopped, his gaze piercing. "A phase?" He crossed the room, stopping inches from me. "Ezra, I've spent my life chasing control, building this empire, thinking it would be enough. But you make me want more. You make me want to be someone who deserves you." His words cracked something open in me, a hope I'd been too scared to name. But before I could respond, the door swung open, and Claire, Julian's CFO, stepped in. Her eyes flicked between us, sharp and calculating. Am I interrupting? She asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Julian didn't flinch. Just wrapping up, he said smoothly, but his hand lingered on my shoulder as he guided me out. Claire's gaze burned into my back, and I knew she'd seen too much. The next day, an email hit my inbox, an anonymous tip to HR, accusing me of inappropriate conduct with the CEO. My stomach dropped. I showed it to Julian, expecting him to dismiss it, but his face hardened. This is a power play, he said, his voice low. Someone's trying to undermine us. Who? I asked, though I already suspected Claire. She'd been circling like a shark, waiting for a chance to strike. I'll handle it, he said, but his eyes were troubled. Just keep doing what you do, Ezra. Don't let them dim your light. I tried, but the pressure was mounting. The board called an emergency meeting, and though I wasn't invited, I heard the whispers. They were questioning Julian's leadership, his judgment, his focus. My name came up too often, tangled in accusations I couldn't defend against. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. And the worst part was knowing Julian was fighting a war on two fronts for his company and for us. That night, he took me to his apartment, a sleek penthouse that felt more like a fortress than a home. We didn't talk about work. Instead, he cooked badly, burning the pasta but laughing as he did it. It was the first time I saw him unguarded. Just a man, not a CEO. We ate on his couch, our knees touching, and for a few hours, the world outside didn't exist. Tell me something real, he said, his voice soft. Something no one else knows. I hesitated, then told him about my dad, how he'd left when I was 10, how I'd spent years drawing to fill the hole he left. Julian listened, his hand resting on mine, and when I finished, he told me about his own father, a cold man who'd taught him that love was a weakness. I believed him, Julian said, his voice breaking. Until you. We kissed again, slower this time, like we were memorizing each other. But as I lay in his arms, the weight of the world crept back in. I knew we couldn't stay in this bubble forever. The board, the rumors, the company they were closing in, and I wasn't sure we'd survive the fallout. The storm broke the next week. A tabloid ran a story, Voss Industries CEO in scandalous affair with junior employee. My name wasn't mentioned, but the details were damning enough to make it clear who the junior employee was. The article painted Julian as reckless, me as an opportunist. I saw it on my phone during a coffee run, my hands shaking so badly I spilled latte on my shoes. I went straight to Julian's office, ready to quit, to save him from the fallout. But he was already on the phone, his voice sharp as he spoke to his PR team. When he saw me, he hung up and pulled me into a hug, fierce and unyielding. This changes nothing, he said, his voice muffled against my hair. I'm not letting you go. But the board, I started, pulling back to look at him. His eyes were tired, but his jaw was set, defiant. The board can go to hell, he said. I built this company. They don't get to dictate my life. But they tried. Claire led the charge, calling for a vote of no confidence. She cornered me in the hallway the next day, her smile cold. You're dragging him down, Ezra. If you care about him, you'll walk away. Her words hit like a blade, cutting through the fragile hope I'd built. I didn't respond, but they echoed in my head as I worked, as I sketched, as I tried to pretend everything was fine. Julian noticed. That night, he took me to a quiet diner, far from the corporate chaos, and made me talk. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, I admitted, staring at my untouched fries. Maybe Claire's right. Maybe I should go. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "You're the reason I'm fighting for this," he said. "Not the company. Not the title you. I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter. You matter." His words were a lifeline, but I was still drowning. The next day, I found a resignation letter drafted on my desk and signed, but clearly meant for me. I didn't tell Julian. I didn't want to add to his burden. Instead, I threw myself into a new project, a campaign for a community outreach app, pouring my heart into designs that screamed hope and connection. It was my best work yet, and when I presented it to the team, even Claire couldn't hide her grudging approval. But the victory was short-lived. The board meeting loomed, and Julian was distant, buried in strategy sessions with his lawyers. I felt him slipping away, not because he wanted to, but because the weight of his world was crushing us both. I started spending nights at my own apartment again, needing space to think, to breathe. Lena noticed, dragging me out for drinks and demanding answers. "You love him, don't you?" she asked, her eyes sharp over her beer. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. But love wasn't enough, not when his empire was at stake, not when my presence was a liability. I went home that night and stared at the resignation letter I'd kept, my pen hovering over the signature line. The next morning, Julian called me into his office. He looked wrecked, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm stepping down," he said, his voice flat. "It's the only way to protect you." I froze, the words not sinking in. "What?" "No, Julian, you can't." "I can," he said, cutting me off. "I've made my choice. The company isn't my life anymore. You are." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was insane, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It was the same look he'd given me that first night, the one that said I was his anchor in a world that kept trying to pull him under. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and kissed him, hard and desperate, like I could pour all my fear and hope into it. "We'll figure this out," I whispered against his lips. "Together." He nodded, his arms tightening around me, but I knew it wasn't that simple. The board, the tabloids, the world, they weren't done with us. And as we stood there, holding on to each other, I felt the weight of what was coming, the fight we couldn't avoid. Julian's decision to step down sent shockwaves through Voss Industries. The board was stunned, the media ravenous. Headlines screamed about betrayal and collapse, painting Julian as a fallen king and me as the villain who'd brought him down. I tried to ignore them, but every article, every whispered comment, felt like a bruise I couldn't escape. Julian, though, was unshaken. He moved through the chaos with a calm I didn't understand, redirecting his energy to a new Venturian nonprofit focused on tech access for underserved communities. He asked me to lead the creative side, and I said yes, not because it was him asking, but because it felt right. For the first time, I saw a future where my work could matter, where I could be more than a kid from Brooklyn with a sketchbook. But the transition wasn't easy. Claire and her allies pushed back, accusing Julian of abandoning his legacy. They leaked internal emails, twisting his words to make it seem like he'd lost his edge. I watched him take the hits, his jaw tight, but his eyes steady, and I hated how much it cost him to choose me. One night, as we worked late at his apartment, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice small. "Giving it all up for this?" He set down his laptop, his eyes searching mine. "Regret you," he said, his voice fierce. "Never. I'd burn it all down again if it meant keeping you." His words should have been enough, but doubt lingered. I wasn't used to being someone's reason, someone's choice. Growing up, I'd learned to keep my head down, to hide the parts of me that didn't fit me: art, my queerness, my dreams. Julian saw all of it, and he didn't flinch. But what if I wasn't enough to fill the void he'd left behind? The nonprofit's launch was our chance to prove them wrong. We poured everything into it: Julian's vision, my designs, our shared belief that tech could be a force for good. The event was small, held in a community center in Harlem, nothing like the glitz of Voss Industries. But as I watched Julian speak, his passion lighting up the room, I saw the man I'd fallen for: not the CEO, but the dreamer who'd built something from nothing. Afterward, we stood outside, the night air cool against our skin. "We did it," he said, his smile brighter than I'd ever seen. "You did it." I shook my head. "We did. Together." He pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead, and for a moment, the world felt right. But the moment didn't last. The next morning, a new article dropped. This one personal, vicious. It dug into my past: me dad's absence, my struggling years, my queerness, twisting it all into a narrative that painted me as a gold digger who'd seduced a mogul. The source was anonymous, but I knew Claire's handiwork when I saw it. Julian was furious, ready to sue, to fight. But I stopped him. "Let me handle this," I said, surprising myself with my own resolve. I was done hiding, done letting others define me. I went to the press myself, giving an interview to a small, queer-owned outlet. I told my stormy art, my struggles, my love for Julian. I didn't shy away from the truth, and for the first time, I felt like I owned it. The interview went viral. Support poured in: letters from kids like me, artists who saw themselves in my story. But so did the hate, the comments calling me a fraud, a homewrecker. Julian stood by me, his hand in mine as we read them together, laughing at the absurd ones, holding each other through the painful ones. "We're stronger than this," he said one night, as we lay in bed, the city quiet outside. "They can't break us." I wanted to believe him, but the world was still out there, waiting to test us. And as I drifted to sleep, his arms around me, I knew the fight wasn't over: not for us, not for what we'd built. The nonprofit grew, slowly but steadily, carving out a space for hope in a world that felt increasingly cruel. Julian and I worked side by side, building something that mattered, something that lasted. But the past didn't let go easily. Claire's final move came in the form of a lawsuit, claiming Julian had misused company funds to start the nonprofit. It was a lie, but it was loud, and it dragged us back into the spotlight. We fought it together, with lawyers and evidence and a stubborn belief in each other. The courtroom was a battlefield, but Julian was unshakable, his hand finding mine under the table during the worst moments. When the judge ruled in our favor, dismissing the case, I felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe. That night, we didn't celebrate with champagne or crowds. We went back to my tiny Brooklyn apartment, ordered pizza, and sat on my worn-out couch, laughing about nothing. It was ordinary, unglamorous, and perfect. Julian looked at me, his eyes soft, and said, "This is what I wanted. Not the empire. This." I kissed him, slow and sure, feeling the truth of his words settle into my bones. We weren't perfect. We'd hurt each other, doubted each other, but we'd chosen each other, again and again. And in that choice, we'd found something stronger than any imperial love that didn't bend, didn't break. Months later, the nonprofit hosted its first community event, a tech workshop for queer youth. I watched Julian teach a kid how to code, his smile brighter than any spotlight. I stood at the back, sketching the scene, capturing the way his eyes lit up when he looked at me. The kids noticed, teasing us, and we laughed, unashamed, unafraid. The world hadn't stopped judging us. There were still whispers, still articles, still people who thought we didn't belong. But we built something real, something that couldn't be taken away. And as I stood there, watching Julian, I realized that love wasn't just the spark, the kiss, the late-night confessions. It was the fight, the choice, the quiet moments when no one else was watching. He caught my eye across the room, and there it was, that smile, the one that was only mine. I smiled back, my heart full, knowing we'd face whatever came next together. Because in the end, it wasn't about the world's approval. It was about us, and the room we'd made for each other, where we were both enough.